anybody there? It seems I'm all alone again. Does anybody care? This planet's empty. I see no signs of life. Please don't tell me that the human race did not survive. There are no people in the future. There are no people. There are no people in the future. No people at all. There are no people in the future. Where did all my people go? There are no people in the future. Let me try my people call. Where are all my people? Where are all my people? I guess I'll fly away now.
Hey, everybody, welcome. It is Friday, March 10th, 2023. Welcome to Raging Chicken's Friday Politics Roundup. Yes, this is Kevin Mahoney, creator and founder of Raging Chicken. Each week we break down the good, the bad, and the ugly in state and national politics. It's good to be back here on Friday. I've missed the past couple weeks. Combination of doctor's appointments and little kind of kid stuff and sickness and all sorts of fun stuff like that. But here we are back again. Although, as you can hear, I got a kind of cough that's been plaguing me this week. Anyways, you can support this show by becoming a patron for as little as $5 a month. Head on over to patreon.com/rcpress. You can help out the show by heading over to our YouTube channel right now if you want. You know, if you're not there already. Smash that subscribe button, like the stream for this show, and hit that notification bell so you'll know every time that we go live. And if you're listening to the podcast version, make sure you leave us that 5-star review. Let other people know what you like about the show. That helps other people find the show and spread the joy. Also want to remind you not to let Paul Martino and his oligarch friends buy our schools and push extremist politics in our community. Raging Chicken has teamed up with Levelfield to launch a truly community-rooted PAC to invest in organizing, supporting local and statewide progressive candidates, and unmasking the toxic organizations injecting our communities with right-wing extremism. We're putting small dollar donations to work to beat back the power of big money. You can get more information and drop your donation at ragingchicken.levelfield.net. On today's show, some of the things that we'll get to. The Supreme Court seems poised to strike down Biden's student loan forgiveness program, not for constitutional reasons, mind you, simply but because it doesn't seem like right-wing members of the courts like it. They have policy differences, so they're going to use their power to strike it down, it seems like. But we shall see. Also, and more on the power of dark money in our society, Biden's pick to serve as FCC commissioner, Gigi Sohn, withdrew her name after 16 months of targeted pressure and harassment by communication industry's lobbyist groups. Sohn has a long history as a public interest advocate and would have been the first openly gay FCC commissioner. Not only that, by preventing Biden appointing someone on the FCC commission, it keeps that commission deadlocked in a 2-2 split between Democrat and Republican appointees, which means that communication industry gets to have its way because the regulators are at odds with each other and can't break the tie. That's what they want. Yes, and there was weirdness in Congress this week in the House oversight hearing on the weaponization of the federal government, so-called, and the so-called controversy over the Twitter files. Yeah, you know, Matt Taibbi may have kind of become a clown, but I'm not exactly sure what the Democratic Party's game plan is either. So we'll talk a little about that. It's kind of a weird thing. Recent story today, actually, I believe it just dropped. NPR, National Public Radio, profiles a far-right group in Florida called National Socialist Florida. The story reveals the group's organizing tactics and savvy use of social media to spread hate and expand recruiting. It also does a nice job of showing some of those kind of quote-unquote soft connections between, you know, the rightward turn in the Republican Party, particular Governor DeSantis's attacks on LGBTQ community and CRT and stuff like that, and how that links up really nicely with the neo-Nazis. Let's take a look at that. A little closer to home, yes, Pennridge School District is now facing a lawsuit after playing games with the right to know law and playing hide and seek with books that the school board wants banned. We'll talk about Darren Lawston's lawsuit, the Pennridge School Board. Great article in the Bucks County Beacon on this, and that he wrote kind of explaining the lawsuit. It's really the kind of thing where you just got to read it to believe it. You know what I mean? It's like, did they really do it? Yeah, well, they're due. They did. We'll talk about that. And Delaware County lawmaker Mike Zabel steps down following credible allegations of sexual harassment. Now, Zabel is a Democrat, and had the feeling that the Democratic Party leadership were a little hesitant to push for his resignation because they were worried about losing their majority or having even a slimmer majority in the House. Now, not sure that was the reason why they dragged their feet so much, but what's good for the goose is good for the gander on this one, folks. So, gotta nip that right away. And Governor Shapiro made his first budget address this week, and that budget address, so this budget is under fire already from education advocates who say he failed to adequately address the demand of a recent court ruling that found PA is in violation of its constitutional obligations to adequately fund all schools. Yes, he provided more funding in there, however, does not meet the requirements, right, of equity when it comes in schools. And his proposal to fund the PASHI system, public higher ed in Pennsylvania, is basically at a rate that's under inflation, which basically amounts to a cut. Yep, a cloaked cut, a closeted cut, but a cut nonetheless. Warned you about him. And look, for more PA Progressive Talk, tune in to the Rick Smith Show's live stream at 9 p.m. Eastern on his YouTube channel, Twitter, Facebook, and subscribe to his podcast, wherever you get his podcast, wherever you get your podcast. Head on over to ricksmithshow.com for the latest across all his platforms. And you got to check out the Sisters of the Night Caucus podcast. The amazing PA women stirring the political cauldron behind this podcast rock the house. And you know where the bodies are buried. Make sure to follow them on Twitter at The Night Caucus. That's at The Night Caucus on Twitter. And subscribe to their podcast on Anchor, Spotify, iTunes, wherever you get your podcast. And you haven't heard, The Signal is a new podcast by the Bucks County Beacon. The Signal is hosted by the Beacon's editor-in-chief, Cyril Michaleko, and produced by yours truly. Twice a month, The Signal shines a light on the right-wing extremist currents streaming through Bucks County and beyond. Cyril has guests on that provide insight, analysis, and organizing solutions so that we can steer the community toward calmer, saner, progressive roots. You can subscribe to that wherever you get your podcast, or head on directly to buckscountybeacon.podbean.com and hit them up there. It's been a great... I mean, already, the podcast is fantastic. We had a great special edition this past Wednesday, International Women's Day, looking at the kind of socialist, feminist kind of history of International Working Women's Day, and pushing back a little against the kind of cultural and corporate appropriation of International Women's Day by getting into some of that real history. Fantastic interview this past week. Do check it out. And attention all you gamers out there, the Game In, that's with two N's, the Game In is a Quakertown-based black family-owned gaming store. They're friends of the show, and they've got everything from retro N64s, the latest consoles, video games for all platforms, collectibles, action figures, Funko Pops, walls of Funko Pops, and kids get discounts when they get A's in their report cards. Can't beat that. Check them out on their Facebook page and follow them on Twitter at the Game In, that's with two N's, at the Game In. You got a question about a game, looking for something hard to get, shoot them a message or drop them an email at thegameinpa@gmail.com. And a special shout out goes to Jonathan Mann, as always, who wrote our intro song, There Are No People in the Future. Check out all his great stuff on his YouTube page and follow him on Twitter at SongADayMan. That's at SongADayMan on Twitter. And a little programming notes. One informational, one kind of like very, very cool. First, we're going to be off next week. So there will be no Out to Coop Live on Monday. No Out to Coop Live on Monday the 13th, and no Friday Politics Roundup next week. It's my spring break, and so we're taking a little bit of a breather. I'm going to need it, and we've needed. So lots of little downtime. Let's just put it that way. But we will be back the following week, and when we come back the following week, I'm very, very excited to announce once again, we talked about this in last week's Out to Coop Live, that Monday, March 20th at 7 p.m., I welcome Aaron Gratz to the show. Now, Gratz is the #1 New York Times bestselling author of 19 novels and graphic novels for young readers. Those include 2 Degrees, Captain America, The Ghost Army, Ground Zero, Refugee, Allies, Prisoner B 3087, and Ban This Book. Now, remember, we've talked about this on this program. We had a guest on the program to talk about this. Last month, the Kutztown Area School District canceled their one school, one book program that was scheduled to read Gratz's 2022 best-selling book, 2 Degrees. It was canceled because right-wing members of the school board and the community objected to the book's focus on climate change. We're going to talk about his book, 2 Degrees, and the controversy. Gratz will also be in Kutztown on April 15th for the Kutztown University Children's Literature Conference. So that's a nice little congruence that not only did the Kutztown Area School District rob their students of the chance of reading this book all together as part of one school, but they're also missing that kind of opportunity to kind of link up with Gratz as he's in Kutztown. But we'll be talking to him again Monday, March 20th at 7 p.m. He'll be on the show, and I'm actually really excited. As I mentioned on the show before, once that happened, the first thing that I went and did is made sure I bought a copy of 2 Degrees. My daughter's really thrilled about it. She's a huge fan. It's a really fun book. Well, I shouldn't say fun book, because it's like, it's a kind of like action-packed kind of thriller. Kind of in danger from kind of catastrophic climate change and things like this. These kids are kind of navigating that. But it's like, it's fun in the sense of like, it's an engaging book. It's kind of like well written, cool relationships, great character development, all that kind of stuff that you would expect. But again, getting banned, getting canceled, because Alan Gratz had the gall to acknowledge that climate change is actually a thing that is happening in the world. So there you go. More right-wing extremism in our school boards, all the more reason why we need to support organizations like Coffee. We had Robin Underwood on the show, not this past week, but a week before, that is kind of working to stop this kind of extremist influence in the Kutztown Area School District. So on that. So very thrilled about that. So we'll be back on Monday, March 20th with Alan Gratz. And look, if we want a progressive future, we need progressive media. Support Pull No Punches, homegrown progressive media today. Become a patron of Raging Chicken for as little as $5 a month. Head on over to patreon.com/rcpress. We're here for the fight. We need you. Become a patron for the price of a good beer once a month. Help keep the media in the movement in the media. Become a patron for as little as $5 a month by going to patreon.com/rcpress today. Well, welcome everybody. It's thrilled to be back here on Fridays. I apologize for, like, as I said, the weird programming stuff over the past couple weeks. It's a combination, like I said, of just kind of sickness running through the family and some doctor's appointments and me. It's that time of year at my work where all these, there's like little obligations that you have to do in work, right? Different kinds of meetings, different kind of stuff that he's paying attention to, in addition to loads of student papers that start coming in for kind of like the first unit of my classes are all coming in around the same time. Then plus then getting sick, which kind of throws everything off, and we're probably trying to play catch up. And then kind of basically overscheduling myself, or not really giving myself enough time to do what I need to do in days, that then ends up something has to give. And unfortunately, the past 2 Fridays, this is what gave, in addition to some other things. So I'll tell you that. But so here we are. We are kind of back for today, and happy to be here before we hit the spring break, where hopefully going to kind of recharge my batteries, because it's I need it. Lots of stuff going on this week. Some feelings that I want to talk about. I'd love to hear that there's things that are on your mind. Just kind of throw them into the chat if you're listening live on YouTube. I'd love to hear it. I should also mention, I've been thinking a lot about this before I get into this week's some of the stuff in the news this week. I've been thinking about some ways of changing up a little bit how, or like, not just how we deliver the show, but how we concentrate kind of building community around the show. I'll be frank with you, is that ever since Elon Musk has taken over Twitter, Twitter has been a mess. We just saw it this past week. I didn't even put this in the show notes, but we saw this past week, last Monday, I believe, Twitter completely crashed because they were doing an update, and there was like some piece of code that wasn't kind of like done right, or was missed, or something happened, and it basically crashed all of Twitter. This has been like, like this is not the first outage that has happened. This one just happened to be a little bit more widespread. But more importantly, given the fact that Twitter has cut its staff so dramatically, and Elon Musk is basically instituting all these changes and stuff, it's affected how many people see the show, right? Or kind of know it's coming. Now, our numbers are pretty, if you just look at kind of the numbers of people that are watching the show, or numbers of people that are kind of doing it. We actually found an increase in membership and stuff over this period, in part because, guests we've had on and things like this. And thanks to all the kind of, the Twitter warriors that we do have that have been getting the word out. But I don't know if you've noticed this, but I've been asking around about this, and it's like, again, it's not just limited to me, but with something as, basically happened with the algorithm and how how Twitter is kind of delivering, letting what it's allowing you to see, what's allowing not see. Now, listen, I'm not going down this big conspiracy kind of shadow banning thing. That's not the point. I really do think this is just a kind of question of like when, Twitter is breaking. I think that I can't remember if it was Sam Cedar from the Majority Report or somebody was on his show who was talking about Twitter as kind of like, the mall that's going out of business, right? It's going like, that big mall that is kind of, basically like a ghost town in there. And that's what it kind of feels like. So like, I just started noticing things like, hey, there's a lot of people that, I'm normally seeing in my feed that I'm not seeing them anymore. And there's all these other people they have no idea who they are. And they're showing up. And then of course, just ways that they changed it. So they want to give you like a For You page versus your following page. And so I always make sure it's on my following page. So at least I'm, expecting it. But it just, there's some people you follow that are, that you're kind of engaged with on a more regular basis. And there's other people you're following that you're not as kind of engaged with on a kind of everyday basis. But you nonetheless, you're following them because they're doing some interesting stuff, and you kind of you're building a certain kind of community around things and stuff like that. Well, it was like finding that I was getting all these retweets from like a few different accounts that I don't follow that, I don't follow really closely, right? And you don't get nothing wrong with that. It's like, but then other folks that I would normally see their content right away, which is one of the reasons why I would spend time on Twitter. Those were not there. Now, again, you kind of find ways around it. So, okay, well, if you want to see them, you just got to go back and you got to click on their page, or, click on their main profile. And then once you click on their main profile and read some of their stuff, it'll start showing up again. That's fine if you've got like, 20 followers, or if you got 20 people you're running fine. But, on Twitter, when you're kind of in the like thousands of followers, you can't just go back and just, decide that you're going to, choose to, spend your day going through all of your followers and clicking on their profiles and reading their stuff just so that they'll show up again on your page. When there's no guarantee that there's going to be, that's not going to just happen all over again, right? So, we got like over 2,500 followers, and we're following, again, so over that. So it's just kind of like one of those things that's kind of a bit annoying. And, we've tried out things like, Mastodon and some other platforms. And while those platforms are, while the platforms are interesting, like Mastodon's interesting as a platform, right? Kind of what people are doing there and so on. It doesn't serve the same purpose, right? It really is, no pun intended, a different animal, right? It's, people are building community and stuff like this and having sorts of discussions, that kind of stuff. But it doesn't, it works in a different way, right? It doesn't work on an algorithm that boosts certain things. So that means, fewer people are going to see your stuff. Now, we've been lucky enough to have such a good group of folks and a good community around us that have been pushing stuff out. but I've been looking for other ways to just kind of say, well, how do we then kind of make use of some other ways of direct engagement? Because it's, it's not just the numbers, right? The kind of number of people watching the show, number of people sharing it, things like this. It's the engagement that I'm kind of missing a little bit more. So, so I'm going to do some things, I think, just to kind of try them out on our Patreon page, in particular for, I think we'll start doing kind of like a version for our patrons, and just to kind of to see how it works, and then maybe we kind of open it up more broadly. But little things like, say questions that people have that you want to have addressed, or things that you're noticing, or announcements that are coming up that you want me to plug on Out to Coop Live on Friday, or Out to Coop Live, not Out to Coop Live so much, but on our Friday Politics Roundup. So we can make this Friday show have that little bit more of that community input feel, which I think would be kind of cool. So I think I'm going to put some forums together and have them up on Twitter. Up on our Patreon page. And that, if you're a patron of the show, you can go and you can kind of fill it out, kind of ask a question, submit an announcement or so on. And we'll do kind of like a mailbag over there. So, just to kind of change it up a little bit. Cause I'm just feeling a little bit of that kind of detachment, given what's been going on with Twitter. So, just saying. Anyways, lots of stuff going on in the news today. I'm not going to pretend to go through everything, in part because I'm not feeling so great. But it's just, just want to focus on a few things. One, it's been disturbingly fascinating following what's the Supreme Court arguments that are hearing cases in about Biden's student loan forgiveness program. There's two cases that are were brought together into one case. The oral arguments were just delivered, where one case is brought by two individuals who did not qualify for the student loan forgiveness, and they're saying that's unfair. The problem with that argument is that what they're calling for as a solution is to basically cancel the program, right? So in other words, they haven't been harmed, right, which is required to give you standing in a case. They have not been harmed, right? So it's like they weren't like asked to pay money, right? But it's kind of more an abstract harm, that because other people got it and I didn't, so therefore I've been harmed, quote unquote. Supreme Court, even the conservative justices, were very, very skeptical of that argument. Especially given the fact that their remedy that they're seeking is to cancel the entire program, which is to harm everybody else, right? So it's not even, it's clear, and this was, people widely suspected this, but you never know with the Supreme Court. They widely suspected that would get thrown out on standing, or that would be just kind of dismissed eventually on standing because it's just a ridiculous argument. The other one is basically calling upon Supreme Court to pull this major questions doctrine thing out and basically cancel the program because it has a major influence on society. Again, there's a standing question there about whether there actually will be any harm, because hasn't been any harm, although there's one state, I want to say it's Michigan, but I'm not sure if it is. There's one state that does have some kind of public kind of wing, public government like office or something like this that helps facilitate the kind of loan repayment that may actually have an impact upon the government because it will lose its fees, something along this. Very small impact, but who knows? But what was interesting, and there was a great show on this, I think it was on Wednesday on the Majority Report, when they kind of had some journalists on. They were talking about what was happening, and one of the things that was pointed out, and this has also been pointed out in some other reports, particularly the folks that are closely following Supreme Court stuff, that people like Samuel Alito and some of the right-wing members were not making legal arguments or raising constitutional questions. They were raising policy questions. Why does that matter? Well, because Supreme Court justices are supposed to be making decisions based upon the constitutionality of the questions before them, right? Not to basically make policy judgments, right? And this has been one of the things that the right wing has long kind of claimed that the left was doing, having these activist courts and so on. When there's real questions about whether that was the case, we can have that argument. But this is clearly a case where the justices themselves are asking policy questions about whether this policy is a good idea or not. And it was a law that was passed, right, by a legislature, right? I mean, because let's be clear about in this case is that what Biden administration chose to use the HEROES Act to forgive some student loans, right? So remember, you had to have under $125,000 of income, right, to receive $10,000 in loan forgiveness if you qualified, right? If you also had Pell Grants, that could go up to $20,000, right? So, and where did that authority come to do that? Well, in the HEROES Act, it explicitly gives the Department of Education the ability to modify or eliminate loans in an emergency, right? And so, and this was the HEROES Act happened a long time ago, right? The HEROES Act came after thinking about the emergencies brought on by 9/11 and so on, and things like this. So it's not like the HEROES Act was about the pandemic, right? But nonetheless, an emergency was declared, right, because of the pandemic. There was real economic impact on businesses and individuals who lost their jobs and so on. And therefore, there was also a direct impact on a kind of a student loan borrower's ability to repay a loan, right, because of the economic impact. So we know that they already put a halt on student loan payments, right? That was one. Say, okay, we're going to do a pause on that. But because of the accumulated impacts, the ongoing economic impact of that, I said, okay, what we're also going to do is we're going to forgive $10,000 worth of those loans for people who make under $125,000, right? That are publicly held debt, right? That's not private loans. That is outside the purview of this. But if your publicly held loans, government held loans, they're going to cancel those under those criteria. And so they're basing it upon the authority that was in the HEROES Act, right? So this is not a situation where it's just like Biden has an executive order that he just kind of makes up for himself, right, to order to do this, right? But it has to do with the executive carrying out, executing laws that Congress has passed, right? And so it seems to me, right, seems to most legal observers that, yes, the Biden administration does have the legal authority to do this. And actually, it was passed through Congress. So it has the congressional blessing of this, right? So everything is, I's dotted, T's crossed. But the members of the Supreme Court, the right, kind of a part of the right wing, like I said, Samuel Alito, John Roberts, were asking about policy questions about whether or not this is a good policy. And that is clearly not the job of a Supreme Court justice. Now, people are speculating, well, it has to, really, they're not just going after the policy. Really, though, what they're trying to do is they're trying to get more power for themselves. They're trying to kind of bring more power back to the Supreme Court to be able to, decide policy. So there's a whole bunch of stuff going on there. But they're using this, there's raising this questions. They're assuming that it's going to be about this major questions doctrine, which was made up whole cloth by members, by the kind of, say, right-wing legal machine, lobbyist organization, eventually right-wing kind of members of the Supreme Court, that basically say when there's major questions, there's no criteria about what major questions are. It's like the major questions, according to them, apparently, then these other things don't apply. Then an organization like, an administrative kind of agency like the Department of Education or like the EPA or like, you name it, they are not able to, they cannot simply execute a policy. That Congress has to legislate for the specific instance that they're dealing with. So, for example, if the EPA decides that, okay, you know what, we need to kind of reduce carbon emissions, right? So they say, well, no, that's going to have a major impact. That's a major question. So the EPA can't do that, right? Congress is going to actually have to kind of pass a new law that's going to tell the EPA exactly how many carbon emissions it's going to reduce, like what percentage of carbon emissions is going to reduce and how that's going to happen, right? Or the EPA, for example, as an administration, basically regulates things like toxic chemicals, right? We just saw that huge train derailment and kind of toxic chemicals being spewed into the air, right? Well, the major questions thing, that what they could do, what the Supreme Court could do, say, oh, this is a major question about the impact of this. And you know what? When the EPA, when it said that EPA had the right to regulate these chemicals, the chemicals that were on that train that derailed, right? The chemicals that were on that train, well, they didn't exist when that was originally passed. So the EPA, therefore, does not have the authority to regulate that specific chemical or that chemical spill unless Congress decides to give it that authority again. So it basically is a way of completely jamming up the way that kind of legislation works, the way that government works, right? As a way of making government practically being unable to respond to things in a quick and efficient manner, right? Which of course pisses people off, right? It makes people more angry at the government, which basically leads into the Republican hand, basically saying you should privatize everything, right? I mean, that's the whole shock doctrine approach, right? Except this is a little bit more slow moving. It's not a hurricane. It's not a major earthquake. It's a slow moving juggernaut that is designed to destroy the public sector, right? And the Supreme Court, right-wing members of the Supreme Court, try to put this kind of like constitutional cloak over everything by saying that it is, has this doctrine. And it's not even a doctrine. The doctrine comes out of nowhere. So we'll see where that goes. Now, we're not going to know the answer to this. We're not going to know what the Supreme Court thinks about this until next summer. Of course, unless like you have Alito or one of his people decide to kind of leak another Supreme Court ruling like they did last time. Let's see. The other reason I wanted to flag this, again, it's a little bit inside the Beltway kind of stuff, but it also, it demonstrates this, the power of this dark money and the way that the kind of right wing will, the lengths that they'll go in order to achieve their policy ends, right? So Biden chose Gigi Sohn, who to serve as a commissioner of the FCC. The FCC is like, it's a 5-person. There's 5 commissioners, right? And currently one is left, and so now it's a 2-2 split. 2 of those were appointed by Republicans, 2 of those appointed by Democrats, and of course they have very, very different visions about how we should regulate communications. Right? Republicans basically want to let communication corporations basically rule the day. Whereas the Democrats, I think, has a little bit more, the idea about the public interest, right? Because the FCC basically regulates the public airways, which technically we're supposed to all own, right? And when you have new forms of communication that come up, like, for example, the internet, like the kind of massive consolidation of power and wealth in places like Silicon Valley with new emergent forms of technology, like social media, right? The Democrats on the thing are more open to basically, say, hey, we should think about how we treat these kind of new communication forms, given that their kind of significant impact upon the way that, the public operates. And, right, there's a public interest here, right? So Gigi Sohn, she was nominated, but she was nominated 16 months ago. And since her nomination, right, she has faced personal attacks. She has faced kind of harassment. The right wing has pulled out all sorts of lies about her past, right? Has blown out of proportion things that she said. Like, so for example, she put out a tweet at one point, kind of pointing to something that, Trump's. Let me see if I can pull up this part again. I should also say that it wasn't just Republicans that were coming out against her. Really, what tipped it was Joe Manchin once again, right? Once he decided that he was going to vote against her, she's like, well, whatever, I'm not putting up with this anymore, right? Joe Manchin basically accused her of holding, quote, partisan alliances with far left groups, unquote, He said, especially now, the FCC must remain above the toxic partisanship that Americans are sick and tired of. And Mrs. Sohn has clearly shown that she is not the person to do that, Manchin said. Manchin also accused Sohn of, quote, using inflammatory language on social media, unquote. Republicans opposed Sohn's nomination, seized on tweets published during the Trump administration, blowing them up on a poster during her first confirmation hearing in December 2021. Quote, so do you still want me to believe that social media is more dangerous to our democracy than Fox News? Question mark. She tweeted in November 2020, sharing a CNN report about instructions Fox News gave to its talent about election results. Though Sohn said the aim of the tweet was to draw attention to the media ecosystem amid a broader debate about the role of technology in promoting misinformation, Senator Ted Cruz suggested the tweet meant that Sohn would censor conservative views if confirmed to the FCC. Cruz, now the top Republican on the Senate Commerce Committee, called the withdrawal a major victory in a Tuesday statement. The FCC is not a place for partisan activists. Free speech is too important. Blah, blah, blah. Right? So as we're seeing more revelations right now about what Fox News knew because of the Dominion lawsuit, we're starting to see more revelations about, like, even people like Tucker Carlson, who basically were calling Trump an idiot, kind of in private, right? Saying that what he's doing is completely wrong, while meanwhile fostering and kind of fanning the flames of kind of, the big lie around the election is stolen. Publicly, behind the scenes, they knew it was all nonsense, right up to the top of Fox News and Robert Murdoch, right? So we see clear evidence. If that's not partisan interference, right? That is anything but free speech, right? That is a partisan agenda that's well-funded, right, and targeted. That would be something that would be in the public interest to actually have considerations about, well, what do you do about this? And so that's what she said. She tweeted about that, and plus it is a tweet. And, but the Republicans are just basically utilizing their talking points. And of course, you got a willing Joe Manchin, quote unquote, Democrat in name, Joe Manchin willing to kind of, do the heavy lifting for the Republicans to make sure that the Democrats cannot get anyone on there that is going to actually interfere with corporate accumulation. So there we have it. So Gigi Sohn, who has a long history as a public interest advocate. She would have been the first openly gay FCC commissioner. By all stretches, or by all reports, she would have been a good watchdog. But this is what dark money does. And so she was facing all sorts of personal attacks. There were people that again, it's some, especially for these. Here's another example. So I'll just read again. This is from the Washington Post. Conservative groups spent hundreds of thousands of dollars attacking Sohn as partisan and extreme, leading campaign focused in states to several moderate Democrats who were already on the fence about Sohn. Quote, Gigi Sohn is too extreme for the FCC, read one billboard in Las Vegas that included Sohn's face and a link to a website for the American Accountability Foundation, a group that has opposed Biden nominees. The foundation and other conservative nonprofit organization, the Center for a Free Economy, placed more than $200,000 in Facebook ads opposing Sohn. In February, the foundation ran ads saying she was dangerous because she served on a board that opposes anti-sex trafficking efforts, a reference to Sohn's role as an advisor to the Electronic Frontier Foundation, a nonprofit digital rights group. The rights group has opposed a law granting federal and state prosecutors greater power to pursue websites that host said trafficking ads, worrying that if they could force online platforms to use police users' search, quote, more forcefully, right? So they're basically taking things out of here, using their dark money influence to basically push out propaganda to sink her efforts. And finally, she's like, all right, this is too much. We're done. Here we are again, back to the question of dark money. Another thing I want to point out, so there was also, speaking of Congress, these hearings, because now Republicans, of course, control the House, and the House Oversight Committee is they're having a hearing on the weaponization of the federal government. Now, of course, this is all just kind of like Republican showmanship, and basically pointing to the so-called Twitter files, right, which were basically the emails of kind of the staff members of Twitter talking about how to deal with some of the stuff around kind of election denying and so on. Right? You may remember that this became a big deal when Elon Musk basically handed over all these like emails and internal correspondence that was happening in Twitter about how to kind of deal with kind of what was happening in social media and the role that social media has been playing in spreading conspiracies. So Matt Taibbi basically took the money. I mean, took the information, took the money, and ran with it and published it and claims that it's this, the worst thing that's possible. Matt Taibbi even claimed that, these Twitter files are more explosive and kind of more controversial, more important to the American public than even like the 2008 economic collapse and amid bank fraud, right? So this is like, the big deal on the right. And of course, he came there as a Republican witness, justifying his work and so on, right? Now, in Crooks and Liars, right? I mean, I think they put it right. Matt Taibbi proves that he's a clown during the House hearing was the title of their title of the piece. And look, I get it. I'm willing to even go there, right? Matt Taibbi used to do some really good work, just like him and Glenn Greenwald. They basically, I don't know if it's just they saw where they're, where they could make a heck of a lot more money. There's a lot more people on the right that are willing to kind of like send, tons of cash their way if they towed this kind of like supposedly free speech line while at the same time, basically repeating Republican talking points by claiming that, the media is not objective while taking really partisan stuff and basically presenting it as truth, all that kind of stuff. Right. So, a hearing about these Twitter files and things like that is designed, for talking points among the right to get everyone on the right basically really all frothed up in time for 2024. All that stuff. I get that. I get all that, right? So, and there's Democrats on this committee, and the Democrats are obviously, pushing back against some of this stuff, right? I mean, they're trying to push out. The thing that got weird for me, and I have to think some more about this, but so I'll put it out there with this, kind of bunch of caveats about. I'm not making a definitive statement here about what the Democrats are doing here, but some of what I've seen now has really raised some concerns with me about what the Democrats think they're doing. So I started seeing these excerpts of the hearing. I was not following it at all, right? Because I think it's, I just can't have that. I know what that is. I know the dog and pony show that it's going to happen, there. And it's just not something I was willing to put any energy toward. Right, to be frank, I'd read stuff about it, fine here and there, but I'm not going to follow it so closely, like as if it's a real thing. But so I started seeing these, posts that were saying, "Oh man, Debbie Wasserman Schultz, right, conservative Democrat from Florida, Debbie Wasserman like handed Taibbi is, whatever, like slams Taibbi with his own words, right? This kind of stuff." I'm like, all right, whatever. And then you have what's his name, Daniel Goldberg. His name. He was the lawyer who ran the impeachment hearings. He was questioning Taibbi too as well. And then he had some other questioning. And so Goldberg stuff got lots of play and people celebrating it. It's like, yeah, this is awesome, destroy Taibbi and all this other kind of stuff. Meanwhile, you have Glenn Greenwald, right, and these other self-proclaimed defenders of free speech, whatever. Right, they're Tucker Carlson hacks for all I care, but going out and basically saying, "Look, this is a witch hunt. Look what the Democrats are doing, trying to destroy free speech to these journalists." Blah 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 blah. Right, and you also know that that's a sham. Well, so I decided, well, look, I just like the celebration of these attacks on Taibbi. I mean, he is a journalist, right? Celebration of the attacks on Taibbi among some on the kind of liberal left. And they're really kind of were more centrist liberal kind of stuff that we're celebrating some of this stuff, like Capital, on Team Blue all the time kind of accounts. And then celebrating this kind of stuff. So I was going to see what's going on. I want to see for myself, right? I started watching some of the hearings, and what's weird to me, and this for me is like a little bit of a cause for concern, is that the performance, right, which is a lot of what these hearings are all about, is about the performance. The performance by the Democrats was to basically to run it like a legal court case, right? Trying to get Taibbi to say things like yes or no answer, right? In order to kind of get him to say these things. And I have to say, even Taibbi said this in the hearing, is that it's they, you know, the Democrats were pushing a particular kind of narrative, and they were wanting answers that were going to fit within that narrative, right? Which again, this is not unusual for these hearings. But what was different is like the way that they stage it as if they're putting Taibbi on trial, right? Even bringing lawyers to ask these questions and so on, was odd to me. And I kept on thinking, is like, man, if I'm just kind of like a person who's not following the news so much, and I see this kind of stuff, it's going to feel like they're trying to railroad Taibbi, right? And so I'm like, holy crap. Right? You don't need to do this to Taibbi to kind of already point out, or already kind of, you know, produce evidence that he's a clown, right? That he's basically whatever, sold out or whatever it might be. I mean, you don't need to do that, right? You can let his own words undo him, right? So I think there was another way of coming at the hearing that would have been not trying to cut him off from answering, because that's what they kept on doing, right? He would start to answer a question and they say yes or no. And they kind of keep on cutting it off. And for people who don't know any better, or for all these people on the right, there's a genuine question, right? Well, why won't they let him answer the question? Why won't they let him talk? Well, they're letting these other people talk, right? It makes it seem as though it's disingenuous, right? And instead, it would have been great to basically have him talk about how he got a hold about this. What were some of the decisions that go? How do you respond to looking at some of these other reports that found a lot of the things that you've published were not true, right? And since then, you know, it's been unclear, or at least we're unaware of a place where you've acknowledged that what was published was inaccurate, and let him dig his own hole, right? I mean, that seemed to be more there, but I don't know. So I'd be really curious what other folks think about that, because it's like, it's one of these things where I became concerned that there's a particular segment of the Democratic Party, the same ones that are always watching MSNBC, right, who are still locked into like the Trump, right? I mean, I literally, okay, here's a perfect example. I'm just going to pull up my podcasts, right? So I listen to all these podcasts, right? I'm going to pull up my podcast, and I'm going to pull up All In with Chris Hayes. Okay? So here's the last several episodes. I'm just giving you the titles for now, or if you want to get into it, we really can, right? Yesterday, Manhattan DA signals likely charges for Trump. 2 days before, Tucker Carlson, villain origin story. And this is all about kind of what he really said about Trump. Day before that, new bombshell text, testimony, emails released in Fox lawsuit. Again, stuff about Trump. Day before that, Trump promises he'll stay in 2024 race if indicted for that. And the day before that, Democrats debunk Jim Jordan's FBI whistleblower gambit. Well, that's a little different than not necessarily non-Trump. And then, again, now we've got kind of back there before, Fox guilty of worst lie in the history of our democracy, right? Again, about Trump. Dominion evidence spells future and legal trouble for Fox. Again, this is about kind of what was actually said with Trump and some of that. I mean, it goes on and on and on and on, right? That's every show where Trump is the headline, and kind of staying within that kind of legal context of the Mueller hearings. Right. And this is where I really think that what Rachel Maddow did with that network by going all Russia all the time, by looking for every little detail and speculating about every detail, bringing guests on to speculate about every little detail about what's happening in kind of with Russia interference in the election, turned the way that network actually covered news by focusing solely on these legal cases. Right. They've built apparently fairly close relationships with all sorts of the district attorneys, right? And with even folks in the FBI, right? They brought on different commentators that were affiliated with the FBI. So it's just this kind of like legal courtroom prosecutor kind of mentality to the way that the news is covered, right? The problem with that, of course, there's a lot of things that are facing us right now that are absolutely critical that are not easily covered through the lens of a courtroom, right? That we need kind of actual journalism to be happening here about issues of direct concern to us as a public, and that extends beyond Trump. Am I saying that we should ignore Trump? Hell no, right? But I'm saying that, like, if you as a network make a decision that you're going to, cover every little twist and turn in kind of like the prosecution of Trump across all these different things, that should not be your lead story every single night. You want to cover it? Fine. Devote space to it every single night and say this is going to be one of the areas that we covered. Fine. Right? But I mean, I'm looking at 1,001 other things that are going on that should not be the lead. And what I saw in the way that, again, I'm talking just wholly about the performance here, right? I mean, this is where I'm really hesitant about making too strong of a claim, because in the performance of it, it looked like the Mueller hearings all over again. It looked like we were talking about kind of Trump again. And I don't necessarily think that is the most important thing that we need to be talking about, or we don't need to be constantly reminding people of that. The Democratic leadership seems to believe that the only thing that they've got is anti-Trump. And that's deeply problematic, especially since we're facing really catastrophic things happening in our history, right? I mean, we're talking about book bans like you've never seen before. We're talking about a climate crisis that is out of control. And nothing has been done to remedy it. Shouldn't say nothing. Some things have been done. Right? Yes, some of the most important climate legislation that's ever been passed in the United States was passed under Biden. Yes, that's true. But every climate expert will also say that it was far from enough. And we have seen now that the carbon emissions are now back to climbing again since the pandemic's over. So we're not seeing a reduction in climate emissions. We're seeing an increase in those emissions. Just as an example. Right? So anyways, be curious what you think about this, because it's just it's been plaguing me for the past couple days. Last thing I'll say, there's a great story in from NPR. It is about this this organization in Florida called the National Socialist Florida, and a journalist is basically following them around Jacksonville, Florida, as they have this like little laser projector that they're projecting up on buildings, things like, a cross intertwined with a swastika, right? That's part of what they're doing. They're doing kind of anti-LGBTQ messages about this, right? And another message that they kind of projected up on a stadium kind of once during a college football game was like, Kanye was right about the Jews, right? So I'm gonna give you saying that to give you a sense of this, right? The guy that they interviewed was a guy by the name of, his last name is Nunez. His first name is what? Josh Nunez, right? Is one of the people that is at the center of the story, right? Just in terms of what the journalist focus on. And here's an example. Nunez and his group regularly coordinate with other far-right groups, forming what the advocacy organization, the Anti-Defamation League, the ADL, calls an unprecedented level of coordination among white nationalist groups in Florida. Quote, what we have seen is a certain types of activism definitely gets interest and recruitment up. And that's what and that's where, like the drag queen shit, this is Nunez again, and that's where, like the drag queen shit, like everybody wants to be part of the team shutting that down, says Nunez, referencing the manufactured hysteria over children in drag events stoked by politicians and pundits and spurred on by extremists like himself. Nunez and his group are intentionally choosing messages meant to resonate with mainstream conservative audiences. At the same time, mainstream political figures like Florida Governor Ron DeSantis have fused some of these far-right talking points into their political rhetoric. This year, the governor tapped into outrage fueled by disinformation over critical race theory by threatening to end high school advanced placement courses in African American studies. Last year, DeSantis signed the so-called "Don't Say Gay" law that barred classroom discussion about sexual orientation or gender identity in kindergarten through third grade. There were 141 incidents of anti-LGBTQ protests and threats targeting specific drag events last year, according to the Gay and Lesbian Alliance Against Defamation, an advocacy organization. In addition, protests against drag shows have been a growing target among far-right groups, according to data from the Armed Conflict Location and Event Data Project. And here's the key. Quote, "We've just seen the largest upticks in recruitment from the drag stuff," Nunez says. He says the group began with just a handful of followers going out to protest drag shows last year, but it's been growing, with demonstrations becoming a monthly occurrence. Quote, "It's not uncommon to show up with 20 dudes now," says Nunez. "We're hoping by the end of this year we maybe got 30 or 40 guys." And it goes on. So it also documents the ways in which they're kind of attempting to appeal to social media messages, the way they think about growing stuff. What's important for me about I wanted to flag this and talk just a little bit about it and point you in that direction of this today, was because it shows you the way that these two kind of the official Republican politics, conservative Republican politics, right-wing conservative Republican politics, and these extremist organizations, neo-Nazi groups, how their language is working in concert, right? And it's done in such a way that both parties could distance themselves from the other, right? But they nonetheless are drawing from the same pool, the same rhetorical pool, as it will. We had, if you remember, a couple of weeks ago, we had Patricia Roberts Miller on the show talking about demagoguery and democracy, and what we see right here happening is literally right out of what she wrote about in that book, right about what we talked about, is about way that these discourses that are kind of extremists, they are kind of othering, they are kind of either or, and they draw from a pool of violence and elimination, that they're emerging, right, between the quote unquote normal extremist voices and the official voices of the Republican Party. This is not new, of course, right? This is has been one of our hobby horses on this show for a long time, but it's good to see that NPR is kind of bringing these things together. And I think it's, one of the things that we have to keep practicing of ourselves, right? Reminding ourselves of how these things work, of how this works structurally, not just how that bad person says this and how that bad person said this, but the ways that the broad right in this country right now is continuing to step down the fascist playbook, right? As Patricia Roberts Miller said on our show, right? It's like you're going up a ladder, right? It's like rarely do fascists that's the first thing that they say out of the gates is not like, let's commit genocide, right? That they don't start. They don't go to that part, right? What they do is they take the first step on the ladder and work in that direction, right? They work toward that kind of thing. And when you start with eliminationist language, right, that you need to get rid of these people, right? You need to get rid of drag shows because they are evil and they are trying to, corrupt our children, is what these people keep on saying. If you start there, right, it's about eliminating that threat, right? And that logic of elimination, and censorship and book banning, right, is all part of that same playbook that goes in really, really dark directions quickly and is on the increase. So kudos to NPR for that. Do check out that article. The article is called "In Florida, Far-Right Groups Look to Seize the Moment." Right? Reporting by Sergio Olmos and Jim Urquhart. Oh, great. What's also nice too, as well, you follow the link in our show notes. It also take you directly there. You can actually listen to it if you don't want to read it. There you go. All right, we're gonna take a quick break. When we come back, we're gonna talk a little bit about the Pennridge School District lawsuit and some other stuff that we got going on here in the state of Pennsylvania. For now, I want to remind you can help support this show by heading on over to patreon.com/rcpress, where you can become a patron for as little as $5 a month. I'm going to have some new content coming out there, as I mentioned at the top of the show. We'll be back right after this with lots more stuff. See you soon.
I'm Rick Smith, and this is Labor History in 2. On this day in labor history, the year was 1968. That was the day that farm labor activist Cesar Chavez broke a 25-day fast. He fasted as a sign of commitment to nonviolence during the struggle for farm workers in Delano, California, to gain fair wages and safe working conditions. During the fast, he only drank water. He broke the fast with a ceremonial mass in Delano. Presidential candidate Robert Kennedy was in attendance. At the mass, Chavez was too weak to give a speech, so he gave his written words to Reverend James Drake to share with those in attendance. He wrote, "We are gathered here today not so much to observe the end of the fast, but because we are a family bound together in common struggle for justice. We are a union family celebrating our unity and the non-violent nature of our movement. The fast has had different meanings for different people. Some of you may still wonder about its meaning and importance. It was not intended as a pressure against any growers. For that reason, we have suspended negotiations and arbitration proceedings and relaxed the militant picketing and boycotting of the strike during this period. I undertook the fast because my heart was filled with grief and pain for the suffering of the farm workers. The fast was first for me and then for all of us in this union. It was a fast for nonviolence and a call for sacrifice." Chavez engaged in 2 more long fasts during his life as an activist. He fasted in 1972 for 24 days. And in 1988, at the age of 61, he fasted for 36 days to highlight the harmful effects of pesticides on farm workers and their children. Like what you hear? Check out more at laborhistoryin2.com.
Everybody, welcome back. This is Kevin Mahoney, creator and founder of Raging Chicken. I want to kind of give one more plug-in, remind you that we will be off next week, but when we come back on Monday, March 20th at 7 p.m., we're going to welcome Alan Gratz to the show. And Gratz is the #1 New York Times bestselling author of 19 novels and graphic novels for young readers, including one that is of current controversy in the Kutztown Area School District, a book called 2 Degrees, which deals with the story of 4 kids that are struggling against the effects of catastrophic climate change. And that was banned by the Kutztown Area School District, or shadow banned, right? It was supposed to be part of their One School, One Book program. And because you had some right-wing members of their school board and in the community come out and say, climate change is not real. We got to have, we need equal time to those people who say climate change is not real and the earth is flat and aliens are controlling lizard people on our, whatever. So anyways, we'll be talking about Alan Gratz. We'll talk about his book, 2 Degrees. We'll talk about the controversy and so on. That's a Monday, March 20th at 7 p.m. Hope to see you there. Other stuff for this week. So there was this fantastic article in the Bucks County Beacon written by Darren Lawston. Now, Darren Lawston, he's over here in the Pennridge School District. And he is currently in a lawsuit against the Pennridge School District, right? In part because, if you recall, Pennridge School District had passed a new policy that was basically designed to ban books, right? Like as we were talking about it, right? It was called Policy 109, right? And so those changes, and this is Darren writing here, so were aimed at, quote, culling our libraries of so-called age-inappropriate books, guided not by trained librarians, but by right-wing school board members' politics. Implementation of the policy was to be guided by a new set of content standards. The new standard was defined by the school board itself. Policy 109 was revised to include sex 32 times, unquote. Right. So basically what happened in the change of that policy is they want to put together a review. They're basically saying that, hey, we want to have we don't want to have inappropriate stuff in our schools. right? And now there's already a policy, right? There's already a process for that. Basically, the American Library Association reviews books to make them age appropriate. You have librarians that review these books and kind of include stuff in here. So there's already a process that's based upon professional standards, and kind of experts in the field, and look at what's age appropriate and all that kind of stuff, right? Regardless, that because you now have our kind of QAnon adjacent school board, right? Our kind of right-wing extremist school board that are kind of, all aboard Christian nationalism and all that other kinds of stuff. They basically said, oh, no, look, we're going to change this policy and we are going to decide, right? Because now we have a kind of, we can run roughshod over everybody since we completely dominate the school board. So that's what we're going to do. So anyways, so that takes place, right? That took place in 2021, I believe. They passed the, maybe it was 2022. All right. So it was last spring. God. So it was last spring. So anyways, so they passed that, and then there's a controversy that comes on. The parents are kind of basically going to check, saying this, we don't want this, and blah, blah, blah. And it goes back and forth, as we've seen in all these school boards. But then in this article, Darren Lawson basically kind of says, okay, look, he was shocked by what was happening in the school boards, shocked by like the intensity of this kind of right-wing rhetoric and the extremism of this, and the kind of, their willingness to, call things about smutty and filthy, all this other kinds of stuff, right? So he says, well, the next morning, this is again from his article, I navigated to the Pennridge High School Library's online card catalog. I stumbled across something peculiar. Looking for Alaska by John Green, it said 0 of 9 copies available. Estimated wait in days was 358 to 359 days. That's right. Every single copy of the young adult novel was checked out for an entire year. Right? He kept on browsing. He said, it turned out the same was true for many other titles, including but not limited to Sold by Patricia McCormick, Flamer by Mike Curato, Sex is a Funny Word by Corey Silverberg, A Queer History of the United States for Young People by Richie Cavat, A Court of Thorns and Roses by Sarah Moss, and No Surprise, allegedly, by Tiffany Jackson. It would appear that the culling had officially begun. So all those books were basically checked out, and they were checked out for a year, which means every single copy was checked out and no copies were available for students to read. This was happening at the same time that the school board was saying that, it hasn't banned any copies. It hasn't taken them off the shelves. It's not kind of like barring, students from having them. Right? And what Lawson did is he took screenshots, right? So he's basically like, don't take my word for it. Here's the screenshots that show you what I'm talking about, right? So he emails the superintendent, and the superintendent says, oh, I got to look into it. And then the superintendent comes back and says, I have confirmed with the high school librarian that Looking for Alaska is also being reviewed by her based on the criteria in Policy 109. All of our librarians are in the process of evaluating their collections based on the new policy language, and certainly hope it doesn't take 359 days for the review. Right? So offers it as this kind of bureaucratic problem. Oh, I didn't realize that. Oh, hopefully it doesn't take that long, and it's just kind of technicality or so on. Right? So this goes on and on and on. Right? And then it finds out that at one point, lawyers get involved. Right? Lawyers get involved, and he basically says, I want to see what's going on, because Darren was basically saying, look, I want to find out what's true, because I'm not getting right to answers. I'm getting answers here. So he puts in a right to know request, right? He says, members of the public have the right to access to records from a government agency, that including school board. So he submitted, and this is back to his story. I submitted a right to know request for a record that I knew must exist. A report from the Pennridge High School Library database of, quote, all titles checked out by those patrons that are not students, unquote, right? That was the 358, 9 days thing. Waited 5 business days with no response from the district, immediately opened an appeal from the PA Office of Open Records, and soon after that was contacted by an attorney representing the school board, Pennridge School District. She mailed me a report and requested that I withdraw my appeal. I opened the report, was surprised by the contents. Not a single controversial book was listed on the report. not even looking for Alaska. According to the online catalog, nothing had changed. All the books were still checked out and all still not due back until September 2023. The report was obviously incomplete and unresponsive. What the hell was going on? I was going to need help. All right. I hired an excellent open records lawyer, Joy Ramsing of Ramsing Legal, and they start going into this. And it turns out then Pennridge School Board or School District starts playing games, right? They basically check all the books back in, or, click a little thing. All the books are checked back in. They take a screenshot, print a report on it saying it's all checked back in, and then immediately check them all back out, right? See how that works? So they're producing things to kind of pretend that they actually have books checked in, that they're not having these books banned, or they are still available for students, but it's not really true. So anyways, Darren Lawson basically goes in and documents this stuff. I want to really encourage you to go check out this article, because what is happening in the Pennridge School District, look, Pennridge is not getting the same degree of scrutiny that is the Central Bucks, in part because Central Bucks is, it's the second largest school district in Pennsylvania. It is it had for a long time really a certain kind of stellar status to it, right? It was supposed to be an excellent school district, and you have people in the Bucks County area. You have folks that commute to New York, and you have the kind of all these kind of networks of artists and writers and all this other kind of stuff built. So it's got this kind of status to it, right? And giving it size and a centrality in Pennsylvania, and it's relatively kind of like relative wealth compared to most other districts. Central Bucks has necessarily and appropriately drawn a lot of attention, but Pennridge has really been kind of out in front of even Central Bucks on this stuff, right? Pennridge basically led with policies of banning before Central Bucks takes them up, right? Pennridge was, had extremists on the board before we saw this in other Bucks County areas, and you have kind of strong connections with the local Republican machine to those folks that are on that school board. And they've, given the way that the district is drawn and given the way the district is, they've effectively been able to lock out any other kind of opposition. So it's a really important test case. And so kudos to Darren for putting forth this legal case. I'm definitely going to reach out to Darren to see if he and his lawyer might be willing to come on the podcast and talk about what's going on. But do check it out. Again, the article is called "Why I'm Taking Pennridge School District to Court" by Darren Lawson. Link for that will be in today's show notes. Great stuff. What else did I want to talk about today? I know. Just a couple of things I'll just mention. Number one, a lot of stuff in the news this week. Mike Zabel, I'm not sure how to say his name. He stepped down following credible allegations of sexual harassment. You had an organizer or lobbyist with SCIU basically said that, told the story, kind of out, basically named him as being someone who harassed her. And then you had other folks, other women who've come forward also with similar kinds of stories. Most of them were not going public with their names because they're worried about reprisals. And the most disturbing part about this the ongoing, turn the other cheek, look the other way, attitude towards ongoing sexual harassment in the Pennsylvania Capitol, right? I mean, that's the most disturbing. But then here is that there were not immediate calls from Democratic Party leadership in the state for Zabel to kind of step down, right? That they were going to try to handle it all internally through hearings and all this stuff. Now, look, I understand that you don't want to basically, that everyone gives their right to due process, right? That's all true. However, once this has made it into the public with credible allegations, that somebody who's been willing to go on the record and testify about these things, if you've been in part a leadership of a party who's called for the resignation of lawmakers from the other political party who have committed sexual harassment, then, you got to apply the same criteria to people that happen to have a D after their name too. I don't know what else to tell you. Now, eventually there was a lot of pushback, right? There was a lot of pressure put on the Democrats in Pennsylvania. and Zabel basically said, "Oh, okay, I'm going to step down from my committees," and I mean that's it's ridiculous, right? It's ridiculous in terms of that's somehow going to solve it, and we're just going to go through the process. But instead, eventually, he stepped down, right? Apparently, after encouragement from the Democratic leadership. So thank God, right? But this is where this kind of party mentality is really messed up, right? When you're talking about things like sexual harassment, when you're talking about equity in education, when you're talking about kind of like systemic racism, right? It doesn't know party, right? Maybe one party is worse than the other ones, right? But there's still offenders in both parties, right? So the idea is to have a standard that you're going to apply across the board, and I hope that continues to be, and I hope the Democrats have learned their lesson. Look, it's a real concern that the Democrats in the House have a slim majority, right? And the fact that this guy stepping down, right, and now there's going to have to be a special election, right, which means Democrats could lose a seat, right? That's going to be of concern, obviously, of people in the party, right? Still, this is wrong, right? I mean, I hope we're on the same page and we think sexual harassment, not something that should be tolerated, especially when it's not just like one incident where there was some questionable, like, back and forth. But when we have a pattern established, several people coming forward, I mean, come on. And I will point out that if both the Democrats and Republicans but all those lawmakers, if they had been hard asses about this from the get-go, we wouldn't be in this situation now, because someone like Zabel would never have been sitting in that seat still. But because people want to keep it hush-hush, because people don't want to kind of like basically hold people accountable for their ongoing sexual harassment, here we are. So I've got no sympathy, right? I don't even think it's a question, right? That's crazy. All right, last thing I'll say for today. Oh, well, two more things I guess to say. The last thing one of the things I'll say is that Governor Shapiro's first budget comes out, and I don't know what to tell you. I think that there's gonna be a lot of discussion about this. I know that from my union president, basically immediately that afternoon. I guess he was at Kutztown yesterday, and Shapiro obviously just announced his budget. And Ken Mash, who's the president of ABSCOF, basically said directly, he said, look, he's calling for basically a 2% increase for funds for Pennsylvania State System of Higher Education. That he's also not providing, there's not being funds that are going to be provided in there to make up for the cost of doing all this consolidation stuff. As again, the Chancellor Greenstein of the Pennsylvania State System of Higher Education said, thought that would be fine, that would be taken care of. It's clearly not. I was just going to say, oh yeah, so that's clearly not going to happen, right? And so basically the president of ABSCOF was basically, saying, yeah, look, you got the funding levels that are being proposed, right, are below the levels of inflation, which basically will amount for a kind of de facto cut, right? That's how these things work, right? When people want to have it both ways, like by showing through doing the PR move of kind of showing that there's some increase for public higher education, but also having the voice of Republicans in the back of their head, right? And the kind of quote unquote moderate, the kind of, this fictional center that everybody seems to kind of like kowtow towards, right? So having the kind of like, fiscal conservative brain and kind of privatization of education brain that Shapiro's had for a long time, he also knows that that he's effectively appeasing those folks too as well by actually delivering a subtle cut. So here we are. We just have a monumental kind of historic case, like Supreme Court case in the state or a Commonwealth of Pennsylvania, basically finally coming through, showing that surely enough, Pennsylvania is in violation of its own constitution by not providing adequate and equitable education, public education across the board. What does that mean? Right? Said, okay, so it means that, okay, we have to address this. We've been ordered, right? We've been found guilty of this stuff. So educational advocates were hopeful that Shapiro would come out with a kind of strong policy saying that we need to kind of make up for this. Instead, he went kind of halfway. Yes, increases in education, but not drawing a line in the sand, basically saying we are going to come here and we have to kind of meet our obligations. We've been in violation of the Constitution for way too long, and we cannot do this, right? So therefore, this is going to be a priority to make sure to right a wrong that has been inflicted upon too many of Pennsylvanians. Nope, instead of doing that, does the wishy-washy stuff. I do feel that we're going to have our work cut out for us under Shapiro administration. Because his tendency, he is not a progressive on a lot of issues. Yes, he's fantastic, right, on protecting a woman's right to choose. At least he has been up until now, right? He's been steadfast. He campaigned on that and all that. Fantastic, right? He's been fantastic, right? As Attorney General, he was great about kind of rooting out a bunch of bad behavior, right? I don't want to just kind of, again, we have more options than good, bad, right? But I'm just saying, you try to locate him on the political spectrum, right? And he is out of that kind of 90s Democratic leadership kind of mold, right? With a little bit of better leanings when it comes to kind of the cultural progressiveness. But when it comes to economic progressiveness, when it comes down to commitment to the public, when it comes down to, it's going to be really interesting to see what he does on labor rights. Be very interested to see where he comes down on this stuff. But, it seems that he's going to buy into a lot of the, we are in fiscal crisis kind of stuff. I was hoping that to see a little bit more of a willingness to stake some ground and fight for it on this first budget with the kind of recognition that he would probably have to negotiate and all that stuff. But we shall see. So something to check out. I think I'm going to start following things that are happening in Shapiro administration a little more closely than I have the past few weeks, just because I've been, like I said, I've been kind of fried, been sick, been dealing with doctor's appointments, all that kind of stuff. So we shall see. Janet basically says that I would love to hear Darren Lawson come on the show, discuss discoveries of the Pennridge School District Library. I'm going to reach out to him today, see if he's willing to come on. I do recognize that there's, in cases like this, when there's a legal case, sometimes there's some hesitancy by the lawyers to actually to go too public about it. But given the fact that he's already written about it, maybe there'll be some, he'll be willing to come on. I'd love to have him kind of to come on and tell his story. So that would be awesome. I agree with you, Janet. So good. Janet also said, I would point out that Governor Shapiro did appoint a Republican PA Attorney General to replace the last 2 years of his seat. Bipartisanship, and don't expect her to be a warrior for abortion rights. That is a really, really good point. Really good point. Yeah, you have the cult of bipartisanship, right? I mean, the cult of bipartisanship is, I think, Shapiro was part of that, right? Plus he comes from kind of mainline Pennsylvania, much more comfortable with the whole charterization of public schools, much more willing to buy into kind of the corporate arguments than some other folks that might be from, Center City, Philadelphia, or from other parts of the state. So we shall see. And that's a really good point, Janet. But saying that with a Republican PA Attorney General that he appointed, she is not exactly going to be an abortion rights advocate. There we have it. We need to say more than that? I don't know. I mean, all the more reason we just got to pay a lot of attention to this guy and then keep out the pressure, I guess. Right. So having said that, that's all the stuff that I really wanted to touch on today. The one thing I will say, I'll put in a plug for this. So if you listen to the show Out to Coop Live this past week, we talked to no, I'm sorry, I got distracted. We talked to Rowan Montgomery about two pieces that he wrote for In These Times. One about the community pushback against kind of corporate power in the Dungeons and Dragons community, and then about anime voice actors basically organizing and pushbacking for fair wages and better working conditions, right? So that was kind of that. I love those two articles, love those two pieces. And you all know, if you've been listening to the show, that, you know, I'm kind of a fan of D&D and tabletop role playing games. I wish I could play them more, but I'll take what I can get. But there's a friend of mine, one of my colleagues, Amy at work, who has a longtime D&D DM and player and stuff like this, who is like has, you know, one of my people that I go to ask questions once in a while, because I don't, you know, I'm still kind of learning how to DM and things like this. But anyway, she's like, you know, we were talking the other day, and she asked me if said she watches Dimension 20, right, which is one of these kind of, you know, actual play D&D games that streams on the internet. And Brennan Lee Mulligan is the DM for this, and he's a great storyteller and so on. And I said, you know, I've seen part of his things before, but you know, their stories aren't all on YouTube, right? So you know, I watch the Dungeon Run and have been for kind of a while. I watch, say, Critical Role to a degree, and I follow them, right, because I get their content on YouTube, right? And the Dimension 20, which Brennan Lee Mulligan and his crew kind of run, is I'm forgetting the name of the. Hopefully it'll come to me. But anyways, it's a pay. You have to subscribe to that channel in order to get their content, all their content. So it's been kind of hard to follow. I've been interested in it because I hear great things about it, but I just, you know, whatever, just one more thing to kind of pay $5 a month or $10 a month, however it is, to do that. And I'm just like, I just haven't done that. But so shortly after that conversation, I came across the fact that they're launching a new podcast, right? And not a YouTube channel, but it was a podcast, and it was called Worlds Beyond Number, right? And it's I was like, oh, that's really cool. So let me go check this out. So while I wasn't willing to kind of drop the money in the subscription to go watch it online, plus because I don't have a lot of time to do it, podcast, I can, you know, when I'm in the morning, I'm making lunch for my kids, I'm doing all that kind of stuff, getting ready for go to work, or I'm listening in the car, I can listen to podcasts. So I listen to a lot of podcasts. And so I subscribed to the podcast, and I'm loving it, right? So I mean, if you're someone who's D&D inclined, right, or tabletop role playing inclined, I would strongly recommend it. Worlds Beyond Number. They did this thing, and I'm not sure how many of these episodes are released 100% publicly, right? Because they're doing these different kind of rollouts. But they did the coolest thing I have ever seen. Now, again, I'm like, I'm always like reluctant to claim too much about, you know, my D&D knowledge, because I still very much think about myself as kind of like a newbie. I never had a chance to play as much as I've always wanted to. This is my first time DMing just for my kids, and we're only able to play maybe once a month by the time we get everyone's schedules together. So it's like, but for me, is like, it was one of the coolest things that they did. So you had, you know, in D&D and these tabletop role playing stuff, you create a character, right? And it's done through these stat blocks. You have like an armor class, like how hard it is to hit you, right? You have like your dexterity, how quick you are, you know, your constitution, you know, how good of a stomach you got, so to speak, you know, wisdom, intelligence, strength, you know, like all these different kinds of things. So, and you kind of create your character, and then, you know, for the role-playing part, you're choosing your kind of your background, you're choosing your ancestry, you're choosing your class, like, are you a wizard, or are you a rogue, or whatever like this. And so and then the more that you kind of invest into kind of your backstory as a character and stuff, the more you can bring that to the role play of the game. And it makes kind of, that's what's really fun about it. It's like collaborative storytelling, right? Well, so usually what happens, you do that character creation, and then you start your campaign, right? And there's a story about how the characters meet and so on. What they did here, what was the coolest thing, is they all had their characters that they were going to start with, but then instead of just launching into the main campaign, they did this mini like pre-campaign called the Children's Adventure. And so it's almost like, okay, these, you know, the players have generated their characters, they know what their characters, they have lots of stuff in their backstory, but now you're going to rewind it like 20 years or 15 years, however, you know, old they are, at a time when they're kids and they first meet. right? And so they, instead of just rolling for stats and stuff, they increase their stats or add to different kinds of abilities or learn different things as part of the story of them as children. It was such a cool thing. It was such a cool idea. It was such great storytelling. And it was very fun to be part of. So I found that podcast, you know, I stumbled upon it, and it's rocketed to like the charts. It's like the fastest growing Patreon kind of in the history of the platform, right? It immediately rocketed to the top of say fiction podcasts and Apple Podcasts, right? Which I didn't know. I mean, because I literally gonna say, like, oh, let's see what else, you know, Brendan Lee Mulligan, see, looking on Twitter and things like, oh, this looks like very interesting. Let me check this out. I'm a fan. So if you're interested in that kind of stuff, again, it's called Worlds Without Number. So that Worlds Beyond Number. You can find it wherever you get your podcast. It's a cool thing. Anyways, that's going to do it for me. I'm going to have to go make myself some tea because I'm starting to feel like a coughing fit coming on. So thank you all for tuning in today. If you're tuning in as part of our podcast, thank you for listening. I appreciate it so much. And don't forget, make sure you like the stream. Make sure you subscribe to the channel so you get a notification every time we go live. If you listen to this as a podcast, make sure you leave us that 5-star review. Let other people know why you like the show. Comment on this stuff. Let other people know why you like the show. That helps other people find this place. We get to amplify the great work of people that we cover. Last thing, what was the last thing I was going to say? I don't know. I'm just going to wish you a good weekend, right? All right, remember, we're off next week. We'll see you on the flip side when we get return for Alan Gratz on Monday, March. We're still in March? Yes. Monday, March 20th at 7 p.m. Alan Gratz will talk about his book, 2 Degrees and the Controversy at Kutztown Area School District. All right, this is Kevin Mahoney, creator and founder of Raging Chicken. Before I lose my voice, I'm going to get out of here. Thank you all for tuning in. Thanks for the questions. Thanks for the comments. Whew. I need a break. All right, everybody. Take it easy. See ya.
Let me try my people call. Where are my people? Where are my people? I guess I'll fly away now.